Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asban Team level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. The Doctor Who fanbase is abuzz with the groundbreaking return of David Tennant as the Doctor, now playing his third incarnation of the character, considering the half-human Metacrisis Doctor is officially his own thing. Everyone is busy talking about what might possibly happen in the future of the show as we eagerly await the 14th and 15th Doctors later this year. However, despite all the excitement about the show's future, I think a lot of fans have forgotten just how uncharted this territory really is, because the Doctor is now like 3 incarnations past the point where Time Lords should die for good, and that poses its own challenges, particularly one that would completely change the Doctor as we know them. So, sit back and strap in, because it's time to talk about the mysterious condition known as regenerative dissonance, and beware spoilers for all the stories on screen right now. Like I mentioned, Time Lords are only meant to have 12 regenerations, an artificial limit imposed upon them by Rassilon. Yes, even before the Timeless Children, it was established that this limit was artificial. Not that you need a refresher, but regeneration is one of the many ways the Time Lord race is able to extend their lifespans. It allows them to survive death at the expense of changing every single cell in their body and becoming a new person, retaining the memories of their past selves. Despite this ability originally being unique to the Doctor themselves, because they're separate to the Time Lords, their adopted parent Tecteun reverse engineered it and turned it into the ability we know to this day. Plenty of Time Lords have regenerated in the show, but like I mentioned, almost none of them have lived past that 12 regeneration limit. The only 3 we know for sure are Rassilon himself, the Master, and obviously the Doctor. But if these 3 powerful Time Lords can keep on regenerating without any clear issues, then why was there a limit in the first place? Well, actually, I'd say there's no clear issues, but Rassilon and the Master are very evil and insane. Although I suppose that's just how they've always been. Can't blame regeneration on that one. The reason Rassilon created this limit of 12 regenerations is because Time Lords simply aren't able to cope with all the extra personalities and psyches that come with these extra lives. This is due to something known as regenerative dissonance, a mental illness completely unique to the Time Lord race. Basically, rather than being given a clean slate with only the memories of the past incarnations, a Time Lord can end up retaining the entire personalities of their previous incarnations, which live on inside their body. Think of it as something like dissociative personality disorder, with all these past incarnations having just as much of an influence on the Time Lord as their current persona. Of course, it is normal for a Time Lord's past personalities to remain within them to an extent, like we see in Power of the Doctor, but regenerative dissonance is a lot more extreme and intrusive. For example, if you're in your 11th body, you have 10 other distinct and opinionated voices constantly trying to influence your decision making and tell you what to do, all the time, with no way to stop it. Yeah, now you'll probably understand why this led to one Time Lord shooting out both his hearts in just his 8th incarnation because he couldn't take it anymore. And from what we know, he was actually one of the lucky ones. He lasted quite a while. The most famous example of a Time Lord with regenerative dissonance is the rogue Time Lord simply going by whatever incarnation they're currently in, such as the 9th, the 11th, the 10th, and the 12th, and so on. For the sake of simplicity, we'll refer to this character as the Collective, which is the title writer John Dorney likes to unofficially use for them. The Collective is the longest surviving character with this condition, making it all the way to their 12th incarnation before seemingly dying for good. I mean, they'll probably come back, but you know how it is. However, like I mentioned, the Collective having so many incarnations means that in her 12th incarnation, she had 11 others all badgering away. They each have clear personalities, like the 2 who is the charmer, the 4 who is arrogant, the 6 who is incredibly violent, and the 10 who is great at hypnotism. Now imagine having all of these voices in your head every hour of every day. Any decision you make is shaped by this psychological council of sorts, all pushing their own personal agendas and arguing with each other inside your head. It would be hard for anyone to live with that, but it would be especially hard when you're an alien who can live for thousands of years. Almost every incarnation of the Collective is an antagonistic villain seeking to cause chaos, destroy the universe, or kill the Doctor. Usually all of the above, actually. However, the 8 was an incarnation who actually tried to be a good man, proving that the Collective can't exactly blame regenerative dissonance for being so evil. They were just kind of always a villain by nature. However, the 8 is living proof that it's possible to suppress the condition, since he was able to meditate away all the constant voices of his past selves. Even though the 9 immediately went back to being evil and couldn't meditate away the voices, the 8 still shows that it is at least possible to live with the condition and mitigate its more extreme effects. Even after death, the 8 lingers as a sort of angel on the shoulder of his successors, who do just kind of ignore him anyway, but at least he's there trying to be a good influence. However, the box set Ravenous does indicate another interesting wrinkle for the condition, because the other incarnations threaten to outright bury the 8 in their subconscious, which suggests that with enough effort, at least one voice could be silenced for good, although this is probably a bad idea in general because the collective is dependent on all of these selves existing to create a psychological balance. I mean, take one away and who knows what's going to happen. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the only Time Lords we know of that have more than 12 regenerations are Rassilon, the Doctor, and the Master. Rassilon basically refuses to die, so he naturally finds endless ways to come back. The Master was granted a new regeneration cycle by the Time Lords, and Missy gave herself a third cycle when she was dying. Lastly, the Doctor was granted a potentially infinite number of regenerations by the Time Lords at the end of the time of the Doctor. This means the Doctor can easily blast past that 12 regeneration limit time and time again, something we've already seen with the 12th, 13th, 14th and soon 15th Doctors all being part of this new cycle. But this means the more the Doctor regenerates without resetting their memories like the Division did, the more likely they are to start suffering from regenerative dissonance. It's never been established whether this condition is something you have to be born with or something you can develop. But I think Rassilon's decision to implement the limit is kind of proof that it is a condition that can develop later in life. And given how the Doctor is now using up more and more incarnations, including the soon-to-be seemingly very short-lived 14th Doctor, that puts future incarnations at a very high risk of developing regenerative dissonance. After all, like I mentioned, even without the condition, a Time Lord still has their past incarnations tucked away inside them. So with the Doctor adding more and more past incarnations to this storage cupboard of sorts, it seems inevitable that, at some point, there will be no more room left and they'll all come spilling out in chaotic fashion, becoming constant voices chattering away in the Doctor's head. Like, we already know how much the Doctor loves to bicker with themselves whenever they meet other incarnations on the physical plane. Now imagine that, but in their head constantly. They wouldn't even be able to decide what to drink because, you know, 6 will be complaining about carrot juice and 7 will be talking about ripples in his tea. It would be a nightmare. So, let's say the Doctor does end up developing regenerative dissonance. What can they do about it? Well, the short answer is nothing really. Much like real-world human psychological conditions, there are simply no cures for regenerative dissonance. However, that doesn't mean there aren't ways to try and minimize it, like with the 8 using meditation. For example, in the audio One for All, the 11 tried to extract all of his past selves into clone bodies. So there were multiple 11s walking around, each with a single previous incarnation inhabiting the mind entirely on their own. However, this was only a temporary fix because all these incarnations began to regress and only have like one personality trait, all becoming simplified versions of themselves. And of course, the more severe consequence is the psychological breakdown that comes as a result of trying to physically split all of these selves. Like I said regarding the 8, they need all of these incarnations to exist in their brain to create balance. It's not something a Time Lord can simply remove to cure themselves because it's part of themselves. It would be like ripping out part of your brain, literally. It seems like the only surefire way for a Time Lord to live with this severe condition is to use a Time Lord created neural inhibitor. This is something the 12 had implanted into her brain for a while during the Time War, but it's important to note that it doesn't outright shut the condition down entirely. It locks away the past incarnations, so they still do exist within the current incarnation's mind. It seems like you can still draw upon them when you need, allowing you to pick and choose when you hear these previous incarnations. They're still lurking there though. The inhibitor just gives you the choice to turn it off and on like a switch. But alas, Gallifrey isn't exactly in the best condition right now, so the Doctor can't exactly pop back home and get an inhibitor if they do develop the condition. So there really is no cure for regenerative dissonance. You basically just have to live with it or get very good at yoga and meditation. I feel like regenerative dissonance is one of the most fascinating yet underexplored and relatively obscure aspects of Time Lord lore. It's something exclusive to Big Finish audio, since the condition has only ever appeared in relation to the collective. I really think it needs to be explored and used a lot more because it makes a lot of sense for regeneration to have more layers and potential dangers outside of just blowing things up. This process of renewal has always been treated as quite a tame and simple change, which obviously makes sense because of how much the Time Lords have refined and developed it, but something like regenerative dissonance seems ripe for storytelling potential, adding so many more wrinkles to the Time Lords as a species. I really doubt the Doctor is ever going to come even remotely close to having the condition themselves, unless maybe it's towards the end of their life and helps to lead to the Valeyard becoming a thing. But I don't know how I feel about the idea of everyone with regenerative dissonance becoming a villain, because that kind of treads into dodgy territory, effectively saying people with dissociative identity disorder are evil when, you know, they obviously aren't. Maybe the Master would be a more suitable character for regenerative dissonance, because we already know they're evil by nature, independent of any psychological conditions. The Master is pushing the boundaries of regeneration more than any other Time Lord, so it would be a great plot development for them to start suffering the effects of regenerative dissonance and having to constantly deal with their past selves arguing and making the main incarnation even more unpredictable than ever. And since the Master isn't a character who constantly appears, it wouldn't feel overused or gimmicky, because you know, it wouldn't be every single week basically. It could even just be a temporary thing, with later Masters managing to somehow suppress the condition or get rid of it. To be honest with you, I mainly just made this video to talk about the collective and regenerative dissonance itself, but I knew it wouldn't really get any traction on its own. There's not even a 1% chance the Doctor or the Master will ever have to deal with this seemingly very rare condition, but I just thought it'd be really fun to talk about and speculate, since there's endless potential with the Doctor now that they have no limit of regenerations looming over them. So I hope you enjoyed this more lore-based video, which is something I do want to do more often, and as always, I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. And an extra special thank you to my Bantam level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Diamond level patron Tom Hibbert, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nick's Games, and all my Gold level patrons Boots, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Francois aka Line Vortex, Herna Verzog, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.